Well, welcome, Dave. Welcome to Different Dadpreneurs, where we explore entrepreneurship and fatherhood. I've got Dave Inglis on today. Am I pronouncing that right? I should have asked
Yeah,
you
you got it.
before.
You got it.
And you've just launched a book called Chief Family Officer. You're about to move your family to Spain. So super excited to dive into your world, what you've been up to as it relates to running a business and a family. So excited to have you.
Oh gosh, excited to be here. These are two of my favorite topics: talking
Yeah,
shop and talking about our most important team, our family, right? So
yeah,
super stoked to be here with you.
yeah. So just getting into how you got to where you are today with the work that you're doing. What was your entry point into entrepreneurship? How did you first step into this world?
Yeah, so the first step into it, I would say, was when I was really young. Actually, I was still in school, and my first business was selling shoes. So I actually imported a whole bunch of shoes from Mexico at the time. I'll never forget the first day they started to show up at my mother's house. I think she was thought I was absolutely nuts when UPS pulled up with that many boxes. I think she thought I was just picking up shoes for myself, let alone the dozens that came. And the real kind of catalyst for that, truthfully, growing up was one of the things that would happen when things didn't go my way, or if I wasn't behaving well, is that the things that I love would be taken away because they weren't mine. I was reminded in those moments, no, this isn't your bike. We got this bike for you, and having a bike is a privilege. And it's not an uncommon story, but that was really the kind of catalyst for me to say, hell with that. I'm going to be making my own money and finding a way to be able to buy the things so that in these situations, you can't take away the things that really, really, really matter to me. So I think that's certainly what kind of gave me the bug for it. But when I was in my research studies, so I was sharing with you, I broke my neck on my back unexpectedly when I was 15. Wanted to play professional sports. That wasn't going to happen, and got into the science of sport. And after doing research on concussions for about 2 or 3 years during my post secondary, I was coming to the end of my undergrad. And at that point in time, I remember my supervisor, Michael Ginelli, pulling me aside and politely letting me know that he saw a lot of potential in me, but it was not in research. And that I was not really gifted when it came to the data analysis research side of things, nor was I having a ton of fun, to be honest with you. But what I was really good at was raising capital to support our research. And so we ended up working together and creating my first real company called Concussion Toolbox right out of university. And that quickly came and turned into kind of a capstone project. Let's see if there's a business here. And that went really well. And with some investor seed money we ended up getting right out of school, we ended up starting that business. And that was where I had a pathway to either kind of get into business banking and look at maybe doing an MBA, or doing a real applied MBA and learning how to run a business myself through that process. So that was the catalyst for it. Was kind of jumped right into that.
And then where did you go from there? Like you said, you could have gone the applied route where you're just in it, or like the actual one. Which route did you end up taking?
It was such a memorable moment for me because I remember at the time I was working with the Royal Bank of Canada. I had been there and been working there for about 2 years while I was doing research and starting this venture. And just as I was graduating, Royal Bank had approached me and asked if I would take a marketing role with them. And I was really contemplating it. I thought, heck, I can maybe do this for 2 years and then go back for an MBA, because my original studies was in sports science, not in business. And I ended up accepting the offer. And when I found out how much they were offering me and paying me compared to other people in the role, I went back and had negotiated for a raise in the salary. I was the number one sales performer in the country as a part-time staff. I was just really good at working with students, people coming into the branches and that, and negotiated it. We got that all settled. I never forget, like 2 days after that, we were at a pitch competition downtown Toronto. We had won the pitch competition. We got a bunch of cash, and there was this moment of like, I can't do both. So I ended up going back to the Royal Bank, thanking them from the bottom of their heart for seeing the possibility in me, but shared my decision to just go all in. Because I saw it really as just like a once in a lifetime kind of window and an opportunity. And I knew that worst case scenario, even if I ran it and it didn't go well or if it wasn't successful, I could always come back to exactly where I was in that moment. And I'm a big believer, write a story that only you can tell. And when I looked at those two, I was like, well, there's clearly one door here that if I walk through is going to be writing a story that's super unique to me. So that was the choice that I went through. And then we ended up exiting that business about 3 years after starting that. That was a bit of a catalyst into the work that I do now, because the real wake up call for me there was my partner walking out on me when I thought that we kind of had it all together. And I've always been a big advocate for being successful in multiple areas of life. And it was one of those moments, Fife, where my audio was not matching my video. And that came to a head and was a big kind of wake up call for me that ultimately was a catalyst for me getting out of that business and starting a new chapter there. And it was when I met my now wife, Jen, a few years after that, where I realized I had a second shot. And she had a 5 and a 3-year-old at the time. So the stakes were much higher than just not that stakes aren't high when you have a relationship and just, without any kids, but I just realized that I didn't want to leave it to chance. And so that's where I decided to go back and start to really study professionally some core skills around communication, conflict resolution, with the intention of really empower myself with better tools to make sure I don't fuck that up again. And as I continued to work with some great executive teams and get into corporate consulting, I realized that this challenge of leading at home was one that we were all really struggling with. And that's where I started to eventually really see that as kind of my calling and a bunch of work that I really have stepped into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, so going back to that previous like TSN turning point in the previous relationship, I feel like that's probably the case for a lot of people, is they kind of bump up against something.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience of it? Just like put it in real terms of what happened for you, what you were noticing when it happened. So I wouldn't be surprised if other guys are going through something similar and they're maybe not seeing it clearly yet.
Yeah. So kind of like, what were the early warning signs?
Yeah. In retrospect, now that you have some hindsight.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And boy, isn't it ever like crystal clear, right? I think looking back, the biggest red flag was how often I had excuses for things. There was always an excuse. There was always a way that I would legitimize needing to have things around me change to support me. So with my partner at the time, I was really focused on growing our business. And it would be very common that we would have plan A, let's spend Saturday morning just going slowly and having coffee and just hanging out. And I would inevitably wake up with anxiety. Not that I would share that, right, with her in the moment or be that open, but I would wake up nervous about something or wanting to get to an email that had come through. And I would always be just saying, wait a little bit, in a little bit, we'll get there. And then over time, I started to, now looking back, I wasn't borrowing time or asking for support. I just kept like stealing from that, just assuming that she understood, and really not realizing that I was unintentionally making continuously like withdrawals from that relationship. And every single time I said we would do something and then I didn't follow through on that, which would have been an investment in that relationship, I just kept pulling and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. So truthfully, I think it's like the excuse of why I couldn't make the payment, so to speak, and like asking for amends on that or different exceptions, that over time, just quite gradually and then quite suddenly, I kind of emptied the account,
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's 17 different ways that I would do that. But I think looking back, that was it. It's like I had a lot of really good excuses, and it was an everyday thing, which to me, it's almost like, I think in the moment, I wouldn't have really realized it. If I think about your question and somebody who might not realize it now, like it just becomes so normal with like how you do things. And there's not these big consequences. It's more this like micro frustration that would exist, but it was never enough for me to say, oh my gosh, I need to stop. Right. Until it got to that point where it was like, wow, I need to stop and I can't get back what I lost here. Right.
Yeah. And you said something that kind of hit me because I felt something similar, which is that anxious need to like work. And I've had a lot of conversations with other guys where it's just kind of like this default setting. You get up and it's like, I like a compulsion to like, I need to check the thing. I need to move the ball forward. How, like what shifted for you around that, or what was the process of understanding and shifting that aspect of how you engaged in work?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had to get a lot of help on this because, I think, I'm sure I could have figured this out on my own, but it would have taken a long fucking time. one thing that really helped me was realizing that what was driving that, because here's the dilemma that I personally experienced. Intellectually, I knew that it made sense to exercise every day. I knew it made sense to not be on my phone and to be with my partner every day for some moments of that day. I knew it made sense, the value of friendship and going out and doing fun shit. But even though I wanted to go and do those things and like put the gas pedal down, it was like at the exact same time I would hit the brake. And so it was this weird dilemma of like, I want to go do these things, but I'm just not. And like, I can't almost like control why I'm not. It seems super unconscious. And what I came to appreciate was that each of us, and definitely myself, has a very sophisticated anxiety management system that's operated internally. And unlike, this old saber-toothed tiger, primitive fears that we're kind of looking out for, this anxiety management system for me was working really hard to maintain a standard that I had for myself. So when I started to kind of really get some help on this and I was able to deconstruct it, I started asking, like, what am I worried would happen if I went to the gym for 90 minutes on Tuesday? Like, what am I worried would happen? So, well, I'm worried that my clients would be frustrated with the time that it took to get back from me. I'm worried that I'm going to lose a deal. I'm worried that we're not going to achieve our goals, right? And so once I was able to kind of pinpoint those worries, with some help, I was able to kind of flip them up underneath and say, so if that's what I'm worried about, what that means is that I have a hidden commitment here. I have a commitment to being somebody who follows through on my goals, who responds quickly to customers, and is successful. And so the big assumption here is, the hidden assumption is that if I go to the gym for 90 minutes, that I'm not going to be those things, right? And what really helped for me was not like, just go to the gym, Dave, it's all going to be fine, and then just pushing my way through, was realizing like, oh, wow, that's the assumption that I'm holding here. And for good reason, because past hurt informs future fear. I've had situations in the past where, not that it was causal, but I would be away at the gym or doing something on my own, and I would come back and realize, oh shit, somebody's frustrated or something has happened here, and would unfairly attribute that to that. And so what helped me get through that over time was realizing, okay, that's an assumption that I have. I'm going to go to the gym and see if that comes true.
Yeah, test the assumptions.
Yeah. And then over time, what was happening was, like, by building some evidence of the fact that that doesn't happen, or sometimes it does, but like really thoughtfully examining like if that's actually why and causal, or if it was just highly correlated with it, I started to just loosen up that anxiety management system to a level where, like, yeah, I still care about all those things, but I also now have enough evidence around me in my life now where I can go and do that knowing that it is actually not directly correlated at all. And those things I can still accomplish both of those things, right? But for me, I think it was a matter of understanding under the hood, what was that anxiety management system trying to protect these commitments that I had as a standard for myself. And then, like you said, just experiments, and then building some evidence where it wasn't getting rid of the anxiety management system. It just loosened its fucking grip enough for me to be able to go and do that, right? Yeah, that's what really worked well for me. And truthfully, that took me probably 3 years of continuing to look at that, right? And actually getting to a spot where I was able to embody the understanding itself.
And I think this story touches on what's really hard is everywhere you see, there's somebody marketing to you saying like, in whatever amount of days, we could transform your business, your life, your whatever. And for something like this, I think there is some hidden expectations that it's something we should be able to shift quickly. So to hear you say like, yeah, it took 3 years. And I think giving ourselves that patience and grace to like slowly test and iteratively change the assumption is a lot more sustainable, because I think a lot of people don't give them that runway to like make some of those big changes.
Well, for sure. So, and then like for me, what that leads to is, if I don't give myself that runway, and more importantly, the self-recognition that I'm trying to be a student of that, and that's great in of itself, and focusing on that, I would just constantly look at the gap that I had and then be comparing it to what my expectation was. And then fundamentally, that just runs right down to shame. So I would say that a big piece over time was like understanding the power of self-recognition and being able to actually celebrate the student level efforts that I was putting into that. And that was super, super helpful. But yeah, it takes a lot of time for those types of things. And like anything good, building a good business, a good relationship, there's ways to triage certain moments, but like fundamentally, those types of sustainable changes, they take time and patience. And that's why I think it's so important to learn from other people, not from just content dry on your own, because it's those real stories that give you some real exposure to common humanity around that and
Yeah.
what like some real watermarks are from real people, right?
Yeah. Which we don't always hear about.
No.
Switching gears a little bit. So did I catch it right? So you, your current wife, you married into having kids? Like you didn't.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what that was like and becoming a dad in a very different way, because it's very different than a lot of people's experience.
Yeah, yeah. So my wife Jen is 13 years my senior. Actually, when I met her, maybe a story for a different time, I lied to her about my age when I found out how old she was, just to try and like keep in the conversation. And 2 days later, filled her in on the goods. And the truth of the matter, once we knew that we just had some really good connection. But yeah, she had a 5 and 3 year old when I first met her, and I joked at the time, I was like, "Wow, I'm like an insta dad." Like it's not like like it was just like instantly. I was kind of involved in that. And truthfully, when we first got together, I remember being very adamant with Jen that like I'm not going to meet the kids until we're for sure that we want to go and do this. Because it was one of those things like I just wanted to respect her relationship with them and their relationship with somebody else coming into their life. But yeah, really, really quickly thrusted right into it. And a few weeks ago I was away out in we're visiting you, not visiting you, but in your neck of the woods in Vancouver. And I was talking with a group of leaders around this question, like, who do we want to become? And that is a motivational frame for understanding like the character qualities we want to develop in ourselves, and that being a really healthy way of kind of orienting our efforts, right? And I was just talking about how at different junctures, even in my own family, in my own parenting role, I've wanted to become somebody different at different moments in time because of who I was and who the family was. So, jumping into parenting and co-parenting Caleb and Quinn when they were 5 and 3, like, wow, do I ever understand now how difficult it is to be a first time parent when you've never parented and you have all of your own experiences of being a child of a family that kind of immediately come into that, and in a way where I just personally felt like I didn't even really know what I was doing or how my experiences I had in the past were showing up in that moment. And I often joke with Jen when we found out we were having Will, it was like, wow, thank goodness we had two really great experiments. I've learned so much is the joke there, right? And the punchline,
Yeah.
because wow, have they ever been the greatest thing when it comes to my own personal development, like being a step parent to them. And I think that relationship as a step parent is really, really, really special, because you get to be a parent and you also get to be a really great friend too, if you choose to be. And certainly in our family, that means that I've established myself as not just a stepdad, but as like a different partner in their life that they can come to that augments Aaron and Jen, right? Their mom and dad. So it was a real wake up call. And truthfully, Jen and I decided not to have a third. So it was going so well. We had our kids every other day and we were running our businesses too at the same time and having a great relationship, Jen and I, where, she kind of said, hey, time's a ticking. Can't be doing this forever myself. So do you want to have a child? And for me, I've always been really committed. I mean, my mission is to be a great dad. Full stop. Full stop. And when I really sat with what having our own child meant in that equation, it dawned on me that, being a really great dad is way bigger than your own biological child or children. And if I'm really committed to that archetype and the role that I want to play, that's a community role. And that's much bigger than just my own child. And then I started to realize, wow, I already am so privileged and lucky to have many opportunities to do that. We don't need to have our own just to make that a possibility. And so we decided not to. And, the running joke in our family is if ever you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Because about 4 weeks after that decision, we found out we were having Will, which has been, yet another just remarkable blessing and has taught me so many other things now as a dad in that kind of chapter too.
Yeah. What's been like the biggest learning you've taken from being a dad into entrepreneurship? There's a lot of parallels, but I was curious about if there's any standout lessons or things that have really helped you in the business side by really focusing on being a great dad.
Ooh, yeah. So the one thing that I've realized with our kids and I can relate to this. I feel like you and I were kind of in a generation where we like have experienced two very different like ways of living, culturally speaking, right? You have like kind of like command and control approach towards like running a business, running a family. This is what the parents say. This is how things are going to get done. To far more of like, in principle, like a regenerative approach, collaborative approach, dynamic, even in business or in family. So I think culturally, I've kind of like been on the threshold, if you will, of those. And I think you and I are similar in age, so you've probably had a similar experience. One thing that I found early on in being a dad is that I would unintentionally be kind of taking in this very much like, you'll do what I say. Here's what I'd like you to do. Here's what needs to be fixed. I'll teach you this, right? And I'm going to tell you what has to be done. And I was always met with resistance, rightfully so, in some of those areas, because kids are fucking smart, even if they're 5 and 3, or, gosh, just wait till they become teenagers now, which are 16 and 14. Whereas I would tell them what to do, I was very, very, very quickly reminded by my kids, were like, well, you don't do that. You don't do that to me. And it was this like comparison game. And I started to realize that when I was taking that approach, it was really compromising my intention of creating an environment of effortless belonging in our home. Because what I was effectively saying to them is here's what I want you to do. And if you don't do it, it's not good enough, which in that kid's terms, it's like, I don't belong then, right? And I need to now like strategically change who I am to be able to belong, which is not what I want. So I've had to learn over the years to really like influence my kids by modeling good student behavior, right? And that the best way if I want them to change something like, hey, tidying up after themselves, is actually going to them and saying like, hey, I want to get better at tidying up myself too. Like we're right now, this is a real-time conversation. I'm living with my mother-in-law for 2 months before we move over to Spain. And it's like, hey, I genuinely want my kids to get better at this. But the way that I can now do it really effectively, and I've learned to do this, is can you guys help me get better at this? Like, where am I doing that well right now? Am I doing it okay, do you guys think, from tidying up? Like, what impact do you see it has on Nana if I don't do that? Are you guys aware of that at all? And I'm modeling good student behavior. And then what it makes it really easy is when we want to talk about them, and more often than not, they just bring up themselves in that conversation. It's now this environment where I've kind of set the standard that like permission to be human here, permission not to have it all perfect, and you belong even if you're figuring it out. So that's worked really, really, really well for me in a parenting context, to be able to create a dynamic where we're helping each other grow, where it's not compromising connection, right? And that's really inspired me to behave differently with my customers and with my team members. Very, very much so. And I would say that, in hindsight, I would naturally do that a little bit more with my clients and with my customers, because the risk of me fucking that up was higher personally. You would leave, there would be money lost, there'd be deals lost, those types of things. But even when I went and looked into the minutia of it, like I was still kind of doing that, and I wasn't bringing that same intentionality or commitment to modeling good student behavior to the way that I was challenging and supporting the people that I was working with. And that's really made a big difference in the way that I work now. And I feel like there's just a lot of good continuity in both those areas in my life where I'm not kind of switching on and off as a result. So I've learned a lot from that. A lot.
Yeah, super cool. And there's something to be said for, I was mentioning to you before that I was reading my journal from last year.
Yeah.
And I posed a lot of great questions to myself that I need to start answering more of. But one of them was, how is the business a mirror of me? Or like whatever is outside, like how is that a mirror of how I'm showing up?
Mm-hmm.
And I found that to be a really powerful reflection, whether it's like what's happening with Maisie, my daughter, and how's that a mirror for like what's happening for me, or the business, or whatever is happening outside, just as a really fast like, oh yeah, okay, I can show up differently.
Yeah, no doubt. I love that question, right? Because it brings it back to your own locus of control.
Mm-hmm.
What is this about me? What is this about me? I love that.
So you have launched your book.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I know there's a ton in there. I need to buy it and get into it still. But in terms of entrepreneur dads, small business owner dads, and your own experience, what are like some of the top mistakes or challenges that you see them being faced with? And then like tying that into some of the things that you're sharing in your book.
Yeah. I mean, boy, when you're a parent and running a business, or playing a key role in a business. You don't always have to run a business to experience these pressures, right? Pressures are coming from all sides. I would say when it comes to like a root cause issue or challenge that I noticed really kind of present in a lot of the challenges that leaders describe that they have, in particular with how they are relating with their partner and navigating some of those moments, because I think that's where a lot of this comes down to is how we are relating to our family members as we come across some of these challenges. Is that there's really no shared vision for what it means for us as a family to win together. I think a lot of very growth oriented dads that I meet and work with, I will often actually ask them on a piece of paper, scale of 1 to 10, give me 3 numbers. First one is, how clear are you around what it means for your business to win? How clear are you for yourself to win personally, what that looks like? And how clear are you what for your means for your family to win together? And like 9 times out of 10, it's something to the tune of like 8, 8, 3. And so I think a lot of times we think that we have a shared vision, but really what we have is a vision for ourselves that we're hoping that our family can adapt to be able to support at the end of the day, rather than spending the time to build a vision around like, what does it mean for us to win right now? Because there are certain moments where your family needs certain things, right? And there's priorities that aren't business and there are priorities that are, but like the now piece is really important. And then there's also, what does it mean for us to win in general over the coming years in a different time horizons? So being able to have really good clarity around that, I guess the challenge is that there's not that clarity. And subsequently, if you continue to tease that apart, it's like, well, why isn't that? And I think a lot of times it's because we don't actually create space, much like in a business. We don't take a lot of space to work on the business. We're always in the business. Fuck, at a family level, it's even worse.
Mm-hmm.
We're always in the family, not working on the family, right? And so in my book, a lot of things that I teach about is what are some mechanisms that you can have as a family that force you to work on the family and to go up a level where you're not acting reactively in it. You're actually creating space to work strategically on it together as something that you're actively building by design. And so really that's a big core part of what I teach in Chief Family Officer. And that's where like the notion of using winning plays from work to put your family first. We have these mechanisms inside of our businesses because we want to build a business that's scalable, repeatable, and profitable at the end of the day, right? And when you have other investors involved, you want to have a rhythm. You want to have some predictability in that. Well, those same mechanisms, albeit maybe the context is different, are really, really healthy to create a dynamic in the way that you manage your family, where you're shifting from rehabbing the issues in your family and trying to fix them when they come up all the time, to much like a professional athlete, prehabbing them and proactively doing the work before you need to, so that when you come against challenge or those types of obstacles, the time you spend on them is significantly less. And you go into it with like a predetermined approach to the way you're going to go and handle those moments, which is absolutely a proven winning strategy in so many other areas, right? So that fundamentally is a big part of why having mechanisms to have these types of conversations are so important, because then we can, take a prehab approach to a lot of that,
Yeah. And I'm curious how Spain, this trip or this move to Spain, how is that? I'm assuming it's connected to practicing what you preach.
Sure.
So I'm really curious about like, yeah, your kids are still in high school, but you're
Yeah.
moving to a completely different country. How does that come about? Like that seems very unique.
Yeah. So like, in its simplest term, like the way Jen and I have kind of thought about this over the years with the kids is like, what does it mean for us to win as a family? And then where are we playing are kind of the two pieces, right? And those have to align. If those aren't working and where we're playing, if it's not going to help us win, we need to make changes as far as where we're playing. We've always talked about as a family that, at least for Jen and I, and for the kids too, like we want to have global experiences. We want to be able to spend time in different cultures. We want to be able to acquire different languages so that we can enjoy the world in that way and be able to contribute beyond our own little city here, right? And that's kind of what it meant to win. And in addition to that, too, is having really great friendships, having the kids being challenged in school academically and being highly supported as well. And, 2 years ago, when we revisited where we're playing in our idea to, move somewhere else for a year, immediately our eldest daughter, who was going into grade 9 at the time, she's like, no way. Why would I do that? Like, I'm going into grade 9. And of course, it makes all the fucking sense in the world, right? But it doesn't mean that we abandoned the vision on it. We were just saying, okay, right now, we're able to accomplish that while staying here. Quinn really feels like she can. It's not like we're, by staying here, having consequences, Jen and I ourselves, while we can always have more and travel more. That's great. But fundamentally, that equation kind of worked out. It has started to break down over the last year. I would say, especially around like our kids being challenged and supported academically, and our kids feeling like they're having a lot of fun and really enjoying where they're at, and really having a sense of wonder and adventure in their life. When we revisited this last year, my daughter Quinn, and we were checking in on that again, she's like, "Yeah, I'm ready to go." We're like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, I see what grade 11 and grade 12 looks like. I'm in the middle right now, and I know what I'm going to get. And I don't think it's incrementally, if not exponentially, better than what I got." So if we go and make a shift like this, that would be really, really key. And like for Jen and I, we believe that much like really good wine, terroir, the environmental conditions, the terroir is what makes the product, right? There's a different terroir in Niagara Falls than there is in France. And that's why you have totally different products, right? And for us, when we looked at where we live, what we do for work, and who we hang out with are the three big things that make our terroir for our family, right? And when we started to look through that, we were like, okay, where are the other terroirs in the world where we could create the environmental conditions to be able to win on our terms and what that looks like? And through our own process, that's where we ended up landing on Spain with the kids. And it was tons of fun, but it's been a dream that we've had for a long time, right? That has just kind of slowly become the present. And that's how we think about it, is like, that's family strategy stuff 101. Like, where are we playing? Those are big decisions. And the real kind of catalyst for it was we were feeling like we were no longer winning or making progress towards winning as a family, and the current where we play choices are. And that's where it was the pain of that, admittedly, for our oldest kids, where they were like, "Yep, we're game. We're game to go." We're like, "Okay, perfect. We've already had this vision. We've already been thinking about things like our work, so we could set up to be ready for something like this. Let's go now. Let's go now."
Yeah. So cool. And what I'm really connecting with is, I was actually just, as you were talking, I was reflecting on the other guy I interviewed for the podcast, who was my coach, Brad.
Yeah.
And he had a very similar thing to share, which is their vision, like their big family goal is to visit every province and state as a family. And they've been driving around doing like RVing, and they bought a van, and like they have a shared goal, and it points them in the same direction. There's alignment and excitement, and it puts you on this journey together where you learn so much together. So hearing the same thing, it's just like there's something about having a crystallized thing that everybody's rowing towards that makes things more exciting and like drives the boat forward too.
I love that. I love that. And I think like what I'm hearing, what you're sharing there is what's resonating with me. Like for the last few years, especially navigating COVID, the launch of a book, all those types of things that are taking place in our home. And my wife, Jen, has a very, exciting vocation too. We've oscillated as a family between being a child-centered family and a parent-centered family. We've constantly kind of oscillated between those in different moments, in different seasons. And the one thing that we've talked about as a family that we've all kind of been yearning for is to be more of a family-centered family. You know what I mean? Like to really have that be what we're all focused on, not going to soccer all the time or going on work trips, but like a family-centered family. And that's just been something that we've been yearning for. It may not be the thing that we want to focus on for our whole life together, but we only have 2 more years with Quinn and 4 more years with Kalen before they go away. So I'm hearing your story with Brad and traveling around. It's like, that's it. It turns you in together. It forces you to become a family-centered family that's on the road, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all those answers are great and right, but it's, as an individual, ours to answer, and only ours,
Yeah.
right? And what we want now. So.
And what I love about these conversations is it starts to add some more creativity and like reflection time to be like, okay, what does that definition look like for us? Or what is that vision? Because everybody's is going to be different, but you get to start to hear a couple like, oh, I kind of like this one, or like, that's probably not us. But you can start to pull on that. The other thread I'm pulling on a little bit too is just paying attention to like, what does winning look like for the family seasonality wise, because there's probably like seasons in terms of the age of the kids and what they're up to. And like there's probably a big North Star as a family, but like these, what does winning look like between ages whatever to whatever? And having like, there's probably some different definitions of what that looks like, and that shifts over time.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's, on my way back on the ferry from Victoria to Vancouver, I was sitting beside a lovely gal who was a specialist in psychosomatic work. We were talking about the different stages of development from a child's perspective. And it reminded me of what you're just saying, like how there are different phases of child development where there are different things that we're focused on and trying to cultivate. And I'm also reminded of a different dimension to look at that, which is that other axis of our well-being and like the subjective experience that we're each having and adapting to support those. So what I mean by that is, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, right during kind of COVID, yeah, our kids were kind of going into the preteen stage, which was all well and good. And there are different things there that we want to go and focus on. But like mental health had rocked our home, especially for one of our kids. And so I think that question of like what winning looks like can also be looked at the health perspective, right? And just like kind of getting rooted again into like the reality of what the needs are for your family right now, or for individuals in your family, let alone like developmentally or seasonally, what's appropriate there. And I feel like that's where being able to have these conversations to explore all those landscapes, to be able to really triangulate and get a sober, accurate sense of what are our internal family needs? What are the external needs that are out there and opportunities? And then how do we start to kind of formulate our definition of that now? I think that's a really important aspect that I've learned to have to look at, is like sometimes the definition of winning can change on a dime based on the unexpected needs and emerging needs of our family members, ourselves included, right? In those moments. And I think those can really be addressed quite well when you can become adaptable as a family to the way we're orienting ourselves around those. And that's certainly in my relationship with Jen, where we've butted heads in the past years when we didn't have that shared vision. And I had my vision, and it was like, well, shit, like this isn't supporting my vision anymore. It's like, well, of course it's not, because your vision is not ours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. What parting wisdom would you leave? And the parting wisdom's going to be directed to these dadpreneurs that might be listening. But more specifically, like what would you share with yourself maybe like 8 years ago? You're a dad, you're a business owner. Like what do you wish you had heard earlier on in your journey that would have made the biggest difference?
Yeah. Oh, good question. To me, the answer is like so clear, because it's so real, and boy, do I wish I learned this a long time ago. When I would fight or be disconnected with the people I love in the past, I would really fight to be right. And I'm a pretty strong-willed guy. At times, not at times, most of the time, I would make sure I was right. And typically what that meant is that I had defeated somebody in my family. It meant if I was right, it meant you were wrong. And I wish I understood that I was doing that, because what it ultimately started to create was a home filled with people who were defeated. Right? And there was a big aha moment for me about 3 years ago when Jen and I were in some of our most challenging moments in our relationship to date, where some great advice I got was, why don't you try and explain to Jen the thing that she believes at a level that is more sophisticated than she is, out of the off chance that she's right, and that in her perspective, there's a piece of gold for you that will unlock your own development. I was like, what? So now all of a sudden, like when we get into arguments, I'll actually fight against myself. I'll be like, hey, hold on, right? So is this what you're saying? Like I try and actually like play back now to Jen or what my kids are saying to me at a level, in a way that's actually clear and better and sharper than what they're trying to say to me. Because being in conflict with anybody, we're under stress. It's not easy to maybe express ourselves fully. So now in those moments when I see that we're starting to experience disconnection, I'm like, hold on, time out. Like you must have something here for me. okay, let me see if I got this right. And I've like, now the experiences of me trying to do that, I'm like really seeing and understanding the person I'm in conflict with. And it's helped me become far less defensive. It's positioned me in a spot where I can be a student of my conflict in my relationships. And it's helped me build the skill of repair. And I would say that's been really helpful for me is, in the past, I would say that I would try at all costs to avoid conflict in our family because I knew the impact that it would have. And now it's like, now that I've been taking this approach, conflict is how we build a badass family. Absolutely. And it's not about wishing away conflict, it's about dialing up repair skills. And I wish I knew that much earlier. And it's not about winning. It's about like, what about this conflict piece? To your point, like, how is this a mirror of me? But using it as an opportunity to actually, one of the most powerful things I ever say to my kids and to my wife when they're arguing with me is, I believe you. I believe you. May not feel like it right now, but I do believe you. I want to try and understand why I believe you, though, because I don't understand why quite yet, but I do believe you. And so I hope that makes sense for you, Fife, but that's wisdom, if you will, or advice that, I feel like has put our family on a pathway of really great connection that you can always wish you had it earlier, but that's one that, gosh, if I could share with anybody right now, that is one that is directly inside of your control. You don't need your partner to change for you to adopt that one. You can start that tonight.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the gift in conflict. Like, how can conflict bring us closer together? Because obviously it's portrayed as something to avoid, and it is costly, but it depends on how you repair it and how you move through it.
Yeah, and I think how we think about ourselves in conflict is really important too. I'll be honest with you, like, I'm a really reflective guy, and sometimes Jen will tell you, I am really, really, really good at reflecting after the argument, not sometimes always good in the argument. And I'll be honest, I get pretty disappointed in myself when I look back at some of the things that I've done over the years. But I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why do I do that? And something that I think is important for all of us as we start to lean into our relational blueprint and like some of the experiences that have formed how we show up in those types of moments is not what's wrong with me, is why is that the right response for me? What's happened in my life that actually makes that the right response for Dave? I'm not saying it's the right response absolutely in the moment. I'm just saying, like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm doing that for a reason. So why is that the right response? And just that allowing us to be a little more curious around like what's happened before that has led me to behave in this way right now. I find that has really helped my partner get on side with my efforts to get better there and to allow me to have a bit more grace, because it's not taking it personally. It's, wow, like, I'm outgrowing something that has impacted and informed who I am to date. And I think, like I said earlier, like when we're shaming ourselves or in a spot where it's like, wow, what the fuck is wrong with me all the time? We're not getting any closer to healing that. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really important piece as we kind of look at that conflict stuff. That's important to note, and an important approach to take for ourselves.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dave. I've had a blast. I'm always picking up stuff in these interviews, so super excited to check out your book. Any other last thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, man. Thank you so much for having me. Last thought is quite simply, like, when in doubt, just ask, what would love do now? That's never failed me. And, life is always filled with moments of uncertainty and decisions. And that's a question that I think helps posture all of us in those types of moments from a place of love. And we need more of that in this world. So thanks for having some time with me today and sharing your love with me.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, buddy.